Good evening. For those of you I don't know, my name is Carrie Wiggum, and I am one of the co-directors of the Institute for Genocide and Mass Atrocity Prevention, or IGMAP, along with Max Pensky, who's right there. Thank you so much for coming here to our first public talk of the semester, and we're so excited to have Bonita Bennett, Dr. Bonita Bennett, with us here for this entire week. I'm going to tell you a little bit about her. First of all, though, I want to acknowledge that Binghamton University is on the ancestral land of the Oneida and Onondaga nations. Bonita Bennett is an activist and scholar of memory based in Cape Town, South Africa. Bonita grew up in the township of, I'll mispronounce it, Bonita, and as a student, she was an anti-apartheid activist. This experience led her to understand the centrality of education, both formal and non-formal, as a tool of transformation in apartheid South Africa. She started her professional career as an educator, teaching in impoverished high schools in Cape Town and educating children living on the streets. Since leaving formal teaching in 1992, she's been involved in the nonprofit sphere. She was appointed as executive director of the District 6 Museum in 2008, a role she occupied until 2020. The museum is dedicated to memorializing the displacement that occurred under apartheid when thousands of families were forcibly removed from their homes in the vibrant District 6 community when it was declared a whites-only area. The museum provided Bonita with a platform to confront issues both directly related to the affected community and their descendants, as well as raise awareness about human rights and sensitize people to situations which call for solidarity and empathy. She's a key player in developing dynamic and inclusive memorialization initiatives which focus on untold stories about the city's painful past. She holds a PhD in historical and heritage studies, where her thesis focused on the fault lines between memory and heritage. And after nearly a 20-year career at the District 6 Museum, she now works as a freelance memory and heritage consultant. She remains engaged with the museum as a research associate and member of its board of trustees. And I can tell you from personal experience that the District 6 Museum is unique in the world, and the work that they are doing is inspiring countless memory sites and museums around the world in modeling how to engage with communities to build memory spaces from the ground up that involve the communities and transform the way that societies think about the past and the way that it relates to the past in the present. I'm so honored that Bonita joined us this week. Please join me in welcoming her.
Thank you, Kerry. Is this okay?
No.
And thank you for the lovely introduction. I think when Kerry says that the District 6 Museum is unique in the world, I believe him, because he's visited so many sites. He's been all over to very different continents, visiting different memory sites. So thank you also for acknowledging that, because it is, in the scheme of monumentalism, it is a relatively small museum, and so it's always great to have that acknowledgement as well. So thank you for this opportunity, and I must say it always helps with the nerves when I see friendly faces who I've met over the past 3 days. Yeah, so thank you also for coming to here. And you take the risk of hearing some of the same stuff that I've spoken about in the past, but I've tried to give it a different focus. And so I thought of talking not only about District 6, but more about the practice that District 6 Museum has given rise to, and it involves memorialization that goes beyond monuments. And I'm focusing on 2 commemorative activities, the one being the 11th of February, which was the day that District 6 was declared a white group area in 1966, and there's always a memorial activity that happens around that. And the other one is a District 6 and Allied Partners activity. It's spearheaded by District 6, but it's not specifically District 6. It is the commemoration of the end of slavery at the Cape in 1834. That took place on the 1st of December, 1834, when enslaved people at the Cape were legally freed, but they had to serve a 4-year apprenticeship to learn how to be free. Basically provide free labor for another 4 years to the slave masters and mistresses. And in 1838 they were eventually freed. And so there's a commemorative activity that's been taking place for the past 20 years, drawing on some of the methodologies of District 6 Museum and other partners as well. I thought I wanted to give you a little bit of background, not too much, but just some background to Cape Town in South Africa. So that's Cape Town. That's the Cape Town we show to the tourists. It's the place where two oceans meet at the southernmost tip, and that mountain range that you see there, that is the Table Mountain range. That little dot there, I tried to get it as accurate as possible, the red dot, that's more or less where District 60 is, on the lower slopes of Table Mountain, and to your, what side is this? Is your right? It's my So to your right, that would be the inner city of Cape Town, and District 6 was located just on the edge of that. This is honing in on that little red dot there, and that would be the District 6 that was destroyed under apartheid. And this, I think you will remember the shape of the map because I'm going to come back to it in a different way later on in my talk. And so that is the area that was declared whites only, and the diverse community was moved out, and the area was destroyed. And you can see there's little few buildings that you can see there, and I think at the time when this aerial photograph was taken, the section on the right there, those were houses that were built to make it into a white group area, which didn't develop on the rest of the land, and the other bits of buildings, that's a University of Technology that was built for white students only in the 1980s, but of course it's open to everyone now. And the other houses were the beginnings of the development that was stopped by the protest. These are the bulldozers coming into District 6 to destroy the houses. And in the classes I've spoken to, I've mentioned to you about how the destruction happened gradually over a period of time. And you can even see, just look at that house being thrown down and the children standing watching it, because it seems like the house has not been destroyed at this time, but they're waiting for the destruction. So it was very strange destruction that happened over a long period. This was more or less what the site looked like soon after destruction, with the rubble you can see, and there's a house that you can see on the right-hand side, and that was eventually destroyed as well. So what remained was, you can see possibly also on the right towards the back, there's a church, there's a school, and then there, in the distance, there were 2 blocks of apartments that were in very good nick, and they renovated that and became whites-only apartments. They didn't destroy that. That was a church that you can see also there on the right-hand side. So Cape Town has got its fair share of monuments. Many of them become invisible. People don't even see them anymore. But when people start taking notice of them, they remember how offensive these grand colonial statues standing in places and reminding us of the colonial past. I don't know, I'm assuming some of you might have heard of the Roads Must Fall campaign. If not, I'll just mention it briefly. It's a backdrop to what I want to talk about, monuments, and not really the center. So there's a monument. The one, gosh, I need to get this right. The monument on that side. To your right, on your right, that monument is called Onze Jan. It's like our Jan, and he was an Afrikaner politician. He is standing, ironically, grandly looking at what we call the Grote Kerk. It was the Dutch Reformed church that was brought to South Africa and was the official church of Afrikanerdom and theoretically of the country. The Afrikaans church, he was a member, he's standing and he's staring at the Grote Kerk, but the irony is he's actually standing in the site. It's called Church Square, that was the site of a slave market under colonialism and slavery. And next to him, we have King Edward, a statue in a great, what we call the Grand Parade, which is somewhere in the center of the city. It used to be a site for the military parades of the Dutch and the British, and he stands there, grand as ever. And he's actually one of the people that we've used in terms of reimagining what monuments could be like. invited people, we gave them chalk, that was erasable, we gave them chalk and we asked them to write their messages to King Edward as a proxy for colonialism. And it was really fun doing it, and some of the messages I will not repeat. There's the famous man, Cecil John Rhodes. This is in a public park on the lower slopes of Table Mountain, and you can see in the time when the campaign against this kind of decolonizing statues and monuments in Cape Town started, and Cecil John Rhodes was the great focus, and that is how he lost his nose. I think the idea was to remove the whole statue, but it's quite heavy, and the plinth itself is kind of connected. And there he is looking over the city. We have several statues of Cecil John Rhodes in different parts of Cape Town. The one that was the most controversial was the one where he's sitting, surveying the University of Cape Town and looking over the kind of grand southern suburbs of Cape Town with Table Mountain behind him. And that statue's been there for many years. And again, became invisible. I think the discussions around decolonization that had been taking place from about 2000 onwards with university students. Something was triggered in a group in, I think it was 2015, who felt that he needed to go. And this was also, if you can just allow me to backtrack, I'm jumping slightly ahead of myself. There was also a campaign in Cape Town, in South Africa, where students, first year and second year students had so much debt. They registered in the hope of getting financial aid. Some of them didn't, and they wanted to register into the next year. They had passed, they had qualified academically, but they were excluded financially. And so that instigated or reinvigorated discussions around free education in South Africa and led to what people call the Fees Must Fall campaign. And so that also, there were several protests around there. There were some gains for students. There were lots of violent protests that happened. There was trashing of universities, students were arrested, and they were beaten up. And it was over a protracted period, but they came up with some solutions of writing of certain amounts of student debt, and the compromise was reached. So it's in that spirit that the whole thinking around the colonial history of the University of Cape Town and Cecil John Rhodes. If you take the red bus, you know those tour buses in Cape Town, you know, you're familiar with the red bus, the tour buses that take you through different cities, and you have the headsets and they tell you where you're going past and what you're seeing. And if you get on the red bus in Cape Town and you drive through this lush green area and you hear that Cecil John Rhodes gifted the land to the University of Cape Town so that we could have this place of higher education. And I think all the discussions, some students got really angry, and on one occasion, 2 students defaced Cecil John Rhodes with a bucket of feces. Many people call it alleged feces, because I don't actually think it was. So they call it alleged feces. I don't think it was actual feces, but it was meant to represent. And threw it over the statue. There were lots of protests, lots of campaigns around the kind of the colonial footprint of Cape Town and how to disengage with that. And he was a great focus of lots of this discussions, lots of the campaigns, to the extent that you can see he's being ungloriously removed with a crane there and is put into storage somewhere else. So I'm giving you a short version. There's lots of complications, so I just want to give you the backdrop to why memorialization that is not monumental is quite important, and how that speaks to the whole thing around decolonizing heritage as well. So as he leaves, a performance artist, I don't know if you've seen this picture, I have written a name, but now I can't actually see it. But a performance artist stood there for the full 4 hours in that position. She's representing a bird from Zimbabwe, that is native to Zimbabwe, and she's representing as the statue Cecil John Rhodes, who also played an atrocious role in Zimbabwe. And you know, Zimbabwe was a Rhodesia before they named after him. And as the statue goes down, she rises as representing the African bird that's rising. Africa must rise, kind of symbolically saying goodbye to Cecil John Rhodes. So even into the New South Africa, there are also different kinds of monuments, and I'm just giving one example. So this is on the waterfront in Cape Town. These are South Africa's 4 Nobel Peace Prize winners, and this is also the monuments that continue into the New South Africa. But I must tell you, I might sound like an anti-monument, not entirely. I just don't want to be part of developing them. It's not my thing. I think there is a place for them, but I think there is also a place for other forms of modernization. And what happens when we get stuck in this monumental complex, this edifice complex, it closes us off to other possibilities. And monuments and statues are essentially closed stories. So that tells you the story of the 4 Nobel Prize winners. It doesn't, you can't add to the story, you don't feel part of the story. And there needs to be different ways of allowing people to be part of unfinished stories or ongoing stories and where they can participate. So I'm going to take you back to this bulldozer. It's another state, I did need to go back and show you the same picture. To remind you that we're talking about destruction. People were moved from District 6 and they were moved to places like Kenny mentioned. I grew up in a place called Bonita Bennett, and this is what the places that people moved to. That was basically, they were dormitory townships. So District 6, although it was not an middle class area and middle class by any stretch of the imagination, it was largely working class, but it was a functional working class who actually had jobs because they could walk to work in the city, they could walk to the harbour where they worked, they could walk and remain employed, whereas they were moved to the townships where there was no transport, and many people became impoverished because they lost their jobs or they lost a few days' wages until they figured out how to get to work. So the bulldozer moved to the townships, and along comes, on the right hand side you will see there, the Hands Off District 6 campaign. So in the midst of the destruction, as some people have moved, remember it's a staged destruction, so not everybody's gone. So in 1988, when it's kind of at the peak, there is this conference that is called, because the small protests that people have not made a difference and the destruction has continued. So there's the coming together at this, it was called a conference, but it was really kind of a dialogue using different platforms. That was in 1988, and it's significant because the hands-off motif was to call businesses and residents, white residents, who were thinking of buying properties in the destroyed District 6. It was a call to them to hands off District 6. This is a traumatized site, and people are likely to return to that. So it was really hopeful about the future. And so in the future discussion, you see where to now, there was a call for a place of memory and for people to be able to tell their stories, remembering that the people whose homes were destroyed in District 6 were largely black people and whose stories were not recorded in any history book that was in the kind of public circulation. There were people who were doing research, many of them were actually researchers and scholars from other countries, so there were stories being recorded, but in the country itself, it was not evident anywhere. And so in the absence of documentary evidence that they ever lived in District 6, because there was nothing left there, people felt that they needed a place of memory, and that gave rise to the District 6 Museum. So the foundation started in 1988 and moved around as an itinerant museum, having exhibitions, discussions, creating excitement about this possible place of memory, and many people came out and contributed to the making of the museum. It took a few years for it to find a building, and there was also a long debate about it because the energy and the dynamism of the District 6 Museum Foundation at the time was really embedded in its ability to be mobile and to go to people, to find where they are, to call them together. And there was a slight anxiety that you're going into a building and the start of institutionalization might slow down that synergy. But I think the trustees made a commitment that they would keep that going simultaneous to having a museum in a building with a door and the entrance desk. It's all very, very new and moved into that space. You'll see there on the floor of the museum there's a map, and the map is in the shape of that outline that I showed you, and I will show you another image of that. And I know some of you have seen that in your classes. And the map has been a very, very important space for people because it started off as a blank canvas. So it had all the streets and it had some of the names in, and it is actually an artist's interpretation of the street grid. So they're not drawn to scale, but it pretty much captured a lot of districts. And this started as a spontaneous act in 1994, and people coming, they're marking where they used to live, they're marking possibly their neighbours, they're marking landmarks that were left off, that the artist left off. And it's always been a great moment of excitement when people come and they see a neighbour has signed on there, and they know the person is alive, and they start on the journey of trying to reconnect. And in an interesting way, the map has been an important reconnector of people who needed to find friends and neighbours from their neighbourhood to verify their land claim for land restitution. And so they would kind of meet on the map or make an arrangement. It was really interesting to hear people call each other and say, let's meet in Hanover Street, or let's meet in Darling Street, or let's meet in Church Street. And they actually mean, let's meet on the map in the District 6 Museum. So there's that shape again. This is the map of District 6. And I tried to get you a view. I couldn't turn the slide around without causing too much trouble, but you see, do you recognize the shape? It's an aerial photo of the same map that is transposed onto the floor of the District 6 Museum. And my lovely story about the map, sorry, it's not usually, I should say, that red tape around it. I see, Kenny, is that why you found it? It's not usually there because people can move through spaces. It was being cleaned at the time, and they were replacing it with a new plastic cover that needs to happen every year. And because it's usually the place people walk on it and they interact with it. But my favorite story about the map is that when the museum started in 1994, and the teams and people, what are the things that will pull people together? What can people relate to? And there was the whole idea of the land, the map, and the street signs, because the streets were also very important to people. They had these little neighborhoods that were centered around particular streets. And the idea of the map came up, and you can see also some of the poets who were active in the early days of the museum. They were inscribed around the edge, and there's some, that is a painting there at the bottom on the right-hand side by a District 6 artist, Lionel Davis, who painted from memory this group of women who are classified under apartheid as African, but whose story has disappeared completely from the annals of history. And so his contribution was to bring them back, and the church that was also destroyed is on the map. Sorry, I'm taking a long time to tell you what my favorite story is about the map, is that it was meant to be there for 2 months, because the museum was going to be, it was a test, and there was no long-term arrangement with the church who owned the building. It was going to be there for 2 months. So this was on the 10th of December 1994 when the museum opened, and it was meant to go down in 2 months after that. And people kept saying, no, extend, negotiated with the church. And it is now, on the 10th of December this year, it will be 30 years since that map is on the floor, and the museum has now closed its doors, because it was meant to be a test period. So I love the idea that this map, it was just going to be this ephemeral thing, and that's why it's so difficult to conserve, because it's made on fabric that wasn't intended to last, because no one thought it would last. And I think everyone who comes in has a different suggestion for how you can do things differently, projecting it from the ground, raising it up in fabric, because it is getting tatty, and then everybody looks very sad and silly. But we need our map on the floor, people need to walk it. But there must be a creative solution, because I think it's going to disintegrate soon. This is also I spoke to some people about the notion of having rubble in a museum, which is not very popular amongst museumologists, because it's not, there is no conservation standard for rubble. And so the rubble is such an important part. It's about bringing the land into the museum, for reminding people that our work is once in the museum, it's part of it. It's incomplete if we do not think about the land from which people were forcibly removed. And you can see that exhibit is designed with rubble in the middle and the original street signs of District 6 that are around the edges. So now I want to take you outside of the museum and take you to some of the memorial activities that happen outside of the museum. There are many, I would say for at least 25 or 24 of its 30 years, the walking routes of remembrance, performance along the site, engaging with site-specific artworks have been the core of the museum's work. It's grown over time and it's changed over time, and there is no one way to be doing this. But on the 11th of February, every year, District 6 take to the streets and they go and they reenact their lives on the vacant land. Because on the 11th of February 1966, District 6 was declared a white group area, and so people often talk about the 11th of February was the day that our lives ended. And so the lives as we knew it in this community ended. So that is a commemoration that happens on that day. And they've also added in another new narrative of the South African, the new South Africa, in that the 11th of February in 1990 was the day that Nelson Mandela was released from prison. And so they also celebrate Nelson Mandela's contribution on that day. And I'm just going to pause it to give an idea of what's happening here. So I'm going to get to the story of the commemoration of enslavement. But just I'll mention in passing here that why music, a lot of the processions you will see music walk playing through the streets. It's an important legacy of the period of enslavement, because the people who worked on the particular, well not only, but in this case, on the urban slaveholding estates, they couldn't apply for leave. They didn't get days off. But there was one day that they were allowed to congregate with each other, and that was on the 2nd of January. So it was to relieve them from the time of preparing the Christmas meal, because most of the slaveholders, most of them were Christian. It was the Christmas meal culminating in the New Year celebrations into the night. And they'd be cooking, chopping wood, they'd be busy now. So the concession was they could get the 2nd of January off. And that was the day when they could freely congregate, because there was a regulation that enslaved people couldn't congregate more than 5 at a time. You always had to have a torch so you could be seen. Sometimes you had to have a bell so you could be heard. But this time you could just go out and be on the streets. And history tells us that the music that they brought with them from Java, from Indonesia, from Southeast India, from Mozambique and Benin, Angola, and all the other places where they came from, found their way onto the streets. And I'm certain they didn't have the guitars they might have, but they were all makeshift instruments. And so the New Year celebration, which is actually the 2nd of January, has always been a big deal for Cape Town. It used to be a public holiday actually until a few years ago. Cape Town always had an extra public holiday on the 2nd of January. But the rest of the country complained and sent us back to work. So it is no longer a public holiday, but it still happens because people take leave and they do all kinds of things to be there. So that is the legacy that's taken into the District 6 story, because it is such a Cape Town story. Because part of the work that we also do is we don't want to create this sterile enclaves of this is District 6, so you only talk about District 6, and this is slavery, so you only talk about slavery and that. So that, I think that kind of approach also enables us to interact much more broadly with other sites in the country, with other sites internationally. Displacement is so common worldwide for different reasons, and through the museum's work, it's actually helped also to make people realize, not that there's something about, it doesn't solve your problem that there are other people that have the same problem, but there's something about the solidarity of that, and it makes you feel less that you are a particular target for the people. So I think to understand that has also been really great for the people of District 6. So those are young musicians, so it's also part of the intergenerational way of bringing young musicians in. So they play some of the traditional music that might have been part of that slave period, but we've also had young people doing kind of hip-hop and more modern forms of music, spoken word poetry and stuff, both For this occasion, we always encourage people to do it on the site of a place that is telling the story. And we make it look like it's just happening, but it is actually a route that we plan every year, because we want to kind of resurrect different stories and not tell the same story every time. And particularly the stories of the lesser known places, which, because the suffering of people will be, it's equivalent, we can't elevate one above the other. So that's the group that's walking there with the suitcases. That was such a wonderful occasion. I think it was in 2015, where a group of, we were trying to find something different, and we approached a group of young performers and musicians, and they created a performance piece leading us through the district. And they reenacted being forcibly removed and packing their suitcases and going to a different place. And the stories are continuing from there. This is also another project that I really liked, and it's on the parking lot of, it's on the site, sorry, of the parking lot in Cape Town in the inner city. It's now been absorbed into the inner city, but it's on the edge of District 6. And the idea was to tell people lived here. So the other parts of the exhibit, we got permission on this day for people not to park there, which was quite a miracle that it was agreed to, but it was also a public holiday, so for fewer people. And we just created this narrative about people living here. And so different artists created works, installations on the parking lot, and had people come and talk to residents who might have lived there and tell them their story. And on the other side, that is a musician, Garth Erasmus, who plays a traditional bow, and the performance poet Marika Ndlovu, who wrote a poem called Lydia in the Wind, and she's performing it on the windy side of Cape Town, on the site of where we think, or where we've researched, where an enslaved woman who played a very important role in the community of District 6 after emancipation. Her name was Lydia Williams. So we're doing a ritual on the site where Lydia Williams' home was. We actually managed to find the foundation, and you can see behind it, that's the actual foundation of Lydia's home. This is also at the end of one of the processions where people are gathering around this cairn of stones, which I should mention, because rubble and stones keep coming up. But this is a ritual that the 666 Museum inherited it from people and kind of amplified it more. It was a small ritual that people used to do on the 11th of February, and sometimes on other days as well. They would go to the site of the remnant of the last remnant of one of the main roads in District 6 that still was there. It's on the site of the University of Technology, but it was undeveloped, and people started bringing a stone to, I don't know exactly. Everyone's got a different origin story of where it started, but I can tell you what the inheritance and importance of that and how the museum has grown there. And people started bringing a stone on the 11th of February and putting it down as a reminder that they are connected, and they would have prayers at the site and busy singing and reflections, and that would be it. And so all of the walks that I've shown you before is leading to the cairn of stones every year. And so it's been built up over time, and you'll see in further slides that we've also at various occasions asked people to tie messages. And at one stage there was a conflict happening around the cairn of stones, which is kind of been resolved, but basically the university wanted to build, it is technically their land. It's again the discussion that we've had in some of the groups about land as a relationship and land as property and title deed. And so the museum doesn't own the land in a sense, but we feel that we do. We do own some right to the land. It was about, and it was vacant land, and the university wanted to build residences and destroy the cairn of stones, which they did kind of, but it's been recovered. And so we got people to not knowing what the future would hold of that negotiation was the 11th of February. So we did a workshop with all the older folk and youngsters, and we got them to paint the stones red, so that in the future, whatever happened, whatever was on top, we will remember that in 2015 we had this battle, because at some stage maybe we will uncover that. So there's a layer of red stones beneath some of those. the lower part, the lower photograph there, on the left is also at the Piano Stones, is a different location, but the one on the upper right hand side, sorry, I am so bad, left hand side. It is left, eh?
Yeah.
The right, left side. That is a float that was built. So there's a new carnival that started in Cape Town. That's very, very, it's like a toned down small version of a Mardi Gras. That I wanted, it might sound rude if I say it's got no purpose. It's got no purpose except fun. Fun is a purpose. And it's like celebrating Cape Town. It's not linked to memorialization or anything like that. And it doesn't happen in District 6. But what they had in mind, which I thought was quite a great idea, they had a budget, which we didn't, and they said, how about we do a fun float and recreate a street of District 6, and we drive it through the streets and we remember the music and so on. And of course, you know, some of us were like memorialization purists. We said, oh no, we won't be part of fun carnivals. But in the end, we said, let's try it. You know, we're always accusing other people of being stuck in ideas. Let's see how it goes. And it was absolutely wonderful. It had its debut on the 11th of February with District 6 former residents pulling it through the site. It's on wheels. They recreated this, a block of District 6 from the archives and photographs. And then I think it was the weekend following, it went to have its fun as part of the Cape Town Carnival. But I think it was actually really, I'm glad we went into it. It was also exploring how we tell the story in different spaces. You know, you have to also be creative and let go of some of the prudish boundaries that restrict you from doing creative things. So, this was a very particular walk of remembrance on the 11th of February. It's the same commemoration, but at the back end of all this work that's happening around memorialization in District 6, there is also a campaign to have District 6 declared a national heritage site. And that was approved in 2004. I remember you being...
I was 2 years old.
She was so shocked when I said 2004 in the class, but she said she was 2 years old. It's a long time ago. And it still hasn't happened.
Yeah.
And look where you are. And the site still hasn't been declared. So the idea was to declare it a national heritage site, focus on intangible heritage, and try and explore what are the ways that you can declare sites in a non-monumental way, or actually in an anti-monumental way, declaring, working with the absence, working with the trauma, but telling a story that is not stuck in the past, because I think that is what the official was very scared that people won't visit Cape Town if we keep telling them about our trauma. So it is about, and I think most people understand that trauma is past, but you also carry it with you, so it's not entirely past, but you also know that transformation can happen and does happen. So it was in the spirit of that it was meant to happen, and lots of bureaucratic years later, it still hasn't been declared, but I believe things have started up again. And so people were so frustrated on the 11th of February 2020, and it turned out it was the last public event before COVID, before the COVID lockdown, where they went with about beautifully packaged 10,000 signatures of people who were from Cape Town, who not only District 6, who support the declaration of District 6 as a national heritage site. And they did that because fortunately the heritage agency's offices are right around the corner from the museum, and it could be on the way to the Ken of Stone. So you see it on the 11th of February, they made a stop and they handed over this document that said, we the people are declaring that District 6 is a national heritage site. So we did a people's declaration of District 6 as a national heritage site, knowing that it's got no legal status at all. But I think in the imagination of people, it was just people needed to do something because they were so frustrated over the years of having these conversations. And it was done in the spirit of a very important document of our country, which is the Freedom Charter. That was the basis of our constitution, which is the kind of guiding document of the ANC and the basis of our constitution and Bill of Rights. And it started we the people declare that the land belongs to all, we live it and so on. And so we wrote this in that kind of town as well. We the people of District 6 community, we declare our commitment and so on. So that is one way also that I think it got us back onto the table in terms of the visitor agency. But of course, 4 years later, they keep telling us COVID happened. And they're finding their way back. So those are the District 6 commemorations. I'm taking you now to the 30th of November each year. I think the first one that we did might have been in 2005. I just gave an example of some of the posters and kind of calls to participate that we have used over time, trying to also do this very differently each year. And people really look forward to this because we've developed a kind of ritual of a series of workshops every Saturday for the month of November. And then whenever the 30th of November is going on the walk, and people carry along with them whatever they've produced in the workshop. Sometimes it's the lanterns to remind us of the lanterns that enslaved people had to carry. This past year we did tags. It was done in clay, but people had to wear tags that identified them as identity tags as slaves at the Cape. So that is Lydia Williams, I mentioned to you. We've got her here as Santa Lydia, and she was known as O Tamaleki. The O is Afrikaans for old, and Tamaleki is a kind of a delicacy. It's like a peanut brittle, you familiar? Is it the term now? Almond rock? Or it's I'm trying to think what, you know what I'm talking about, I'm just using the wrong words, not familiar too. But you know what I'm talking about. Peanut brittle. Brittle. I said brittle, so maybe that's why you didn't recognize. So it's a delicacy that she used to make in her home on the 1st of December when she invited people to her home after she was freed in District 6, and would have all these treats at her house. And so those are just some of the different posters where we gather. You'll see each of them start on the night of the 30th of November. It's quite a process because many, traveling to the city after hours, the people that we want are not only the academics who are researching slavery or people who have access to vehicles. Transport in Cape Town is really, really bad, and it's also the places that people come from are not safe. And so a lot of the work that goes into preparing for December 1st is trying to find safe transport for people to come at night into a city that is not very safe. And we are in the habit of merging lots of different stories, and in the midst of this, we also, because when you walk through the city, you just see the joy of remembrance on people's faces as they remember the walking through the city in the time they live in District 6. And also the joy of people who don't know District 6, but they cannot walk in the city as you are able to do because it's so unsafe. So women don't walk alone in Cape Town. Unless you have a car, you have transport, you are escorted. And this is the period where there is, I think it's an international movement, 16 days of activism against violence. Women and children. I always get the prepositions wrong. But you know what I'm talking about. So this falls within that period. So we also celebrate the freedom that women have to walk the city at night and to be safe. We were very fortunate. I don't know if I'm allowed to say it, Kerry, about the funding, but Kerry assisted us with finding some of the funding, or all of the funding that we needed to transport people for last year's walk, which would not have happened if we hadn't had that support. So thank you for that. So these are the things that sometimes happen, where that the straw lady is, that is the site of the slave tree, where people, so that's not the actual tree, but it's the site where the auction tree, where enslaved people were auctioned off. And if you look in this direction, if you could look in this direction, you would see Onzayan standing in the slave market that I showed you earlier, the Afrikaner politician. And this was created in the workshop that people had, and they thought they wanted to, in the discussions, I'm not sure which year this was, I think this might have been 2017 or 2018, where the discussion around the theme for that year was around what the traditional medicines, the herbs, the flora of the Cape, a lot of the indigenous knowledge has been lost because of colonization, because of apartheid, because of forced removals, and how the landscape has changed. And so people access herbs that we call bohu and villa alts and sage and all of those, and they created this slave lady, the store lady, and they stuffed her with all the indigenous herbs, and she was there to receive us, because this was the end point of the war at that time. These were the image names. So it's just an idea of different things that people made, and those are the banners that they carried along, that they made for the walk. At the top left there, the lighting of the candles is at the slave tree that you saw, better light, because we were installing at that time. And so that is happening at the end of the walk, and the drumming was happening at a spot where we stopped along the way. I think I made an error and the one on the left hand side there is the start of the walk it's a big quarry from which a lot of the buildings of Cape Town have been built, and the rock was hewn out of this quarry by the enslaved people at the Cape, and so we symbolically started with there. I think the next one is a picture, sorry about that. And this is also just lighting the candle at the end of the book. The person that you see there in the front in white t-shirt is an artist who's worked very closely with the 66 Museum for many years, and she just passed away on Sunday. And so in my heart, dedicate this discussion to the memory of Aisha. Those are the red stones I was telling you about, so there's a layer on top of it. But this was the red stones represent a particular part of the story of District 6. So it's always, you can see, it's always about the land, it's always about the rubble, it's always about, and things, when I say things organically, I hope you're not hearing me say that we just make it up as we go along. It's like one thing leads to another, so you start working with the land. It's a lot of discussion and a lot of tactile interaction with the earth. Sometimes we just go and we go scratch around and we do a bit of archaeology. And something like touching the earth is very generative and very, very inspiring. And that is how the whole thing of walking the city, we use it as a research methodology as well, as a way of engaging with space, engaging with each other, and also really taking ownership of a space and remembering that way. And I think the people who've worked with District 6 Museum, they're not only District 6s, they come from all over, they support the work, they see it. We're trying to build this movement as part of a Cape Town story. You don't need to have come from District 6 to be a fan of or a supporter of the work. It's a Cape Town story, owning that. And I think by that we're also trying to break down the kind of bounded identities people have. So is it that District 6 people only look out for their people and people in other areas and tell their story and trying to kind of provide this integration. And this is just some of the ways that we've imagined memorialization can work, and that it doesn't have to be permanent. The store lady disappeared 2 weeks later, and I think we've made people comfortable that it's okay. The process, it is engaging in the process, and what you experience and also what you create together, which is an important part. I think I left out, I'm coming to the end, but I think I just left out one good thing that I wanted to explain why we do the walk on the 30th of November, going into the 1st of December. Because one of the workshops we did an imaginative kind of historical imagination exercise with people that included young and old, and we said, if you knew that the 1st of December was coming and you were going to be freed on the morning of the 1st of December legally, would you have an early night on the 30th of November? What would you be doing? And we got people to imagine what it might have felt like, what would you be doing, what would you be preparing for, and everyone thought that they would be having this glorious party in the streets, they would celebrate their freedom, they would wait for midnight, and they would go out. And so this is where the walk in the night comes from. And so we try and be at the spot. That's why it starts at 9:30, sometimes 10 o'clock. We try and be at the end spot at 9:30, and we do a symbolic ringing of the bell, have a moment of silence, and then they have some sharing at the spot. In moments when we have had good relations with our mayor, sometimes there are people want things from you and then you get negotiated, that they actually light up Table Mountain, and it's spectacular. And then light it up at midnight. It apparently is expensive. I don't know what the cost is. In my mind, it's just switching on the light. And that has really been a wonderful backdrop. And that little thing has also made the people who participate in this, it's not an event of the city, although we'd like to get there. It's an event that's cobbled together with even the meals, the workshops, people bring something, it's bring and sharing, you're bringing things, materials for a workshop, and to see that the city actually knows about us and they're willing to light up the mountain, has done so much for people, those little things, but they matter and they care, and it is an important story. So those are just some thoughts. I hope I'm still within time, because I have developed very bad habits in this week of speaking in one long continuous sentence. But so these are some of the thoughts of how we imagine that there is a life and an afterlife for a vibrant memorial practice. And I think, even though I think we've done great work, I imagine that there's just so much more that we can do, particularly now. I'm also going to say now that COVID is over, but that actual in-person visits and interactions are more possible, and that we started before the COVID lockdown, and people can travel and experience each other's work inside. And some things work in certain places, and other things don't work. But I think we can borrow respectfully from each other to build a wonderful practice, a body of work that actually is well thought through and grounded, and not just a fun carnival. Thank you.
I told Bonita I would pick people to call on, so she didn't have to. So we have about half an hour for questions. Yeah, Donald's first.
Sure. No, just to go back to the actual process and fight to have District 6 declared a national historic site or historic monument. Obviously, the symbolic value of that is enormous, but what are the actual material benefits to that? Are there preservation benefits to that? Is there a way that the law can help you preserve things if you get that official national designation?
A little bit of yes and a little bit of no. Part of what we want to explore with the heritage agency is how do you conserve the memory of absence. And so it's not necessarily a material conservation. And we imagine that it could be done in some of these different ways. There are also larger art projects and murals and on-site exhibitions that we've done that we construct in a particular way so that it disappears into the environment. The benefit is that it's not material benefit really. It's just in terms of people whose histories have been forever being subjugated and forgotten and hidden. And that site that's symbolically so important of other sites of forced removals across the country, that was the intention of doing that. And it wasn't about so much. But there is material. There were 3 schools and 4 churches and 2 mosques that remained on the site that were probably going to be at the tail end of the destruction and never happened. And the Heritage Agency is very keen to declare that.
Right.
But we're not keen for that, because we think that's divisive. And the privileging of then it's going back to the Monument Council way of declaring material heritage only. So we're very keen that we do have some ideas of how it can be done, but that those material sites they are conserved, but they shouldn't be without a holistic declaration, and different things will happen at different times. It's not easy, and the complexity is overwhelming for the people who need to help us implement. But yeah, we've given a lot of, it's taken, she was 2 years old. So from 2004 until now, we've had time to experiment. So all of the museums were actually from 2004 onwards when we decided to enter this fray of heritage. Because up till that time, it was memory was the main thing. Memory was the dynamic thing. Memory was what we knew best. And then trying to elevate that story so it becomes visible. Otherwise, we remain this little ghetto museum that people don't really know about and don't know about the work. So it was part of elevating also the practice of memory in this particular way and saying that it can speak to national heritage. But I mean, there's a whole discussion around that because part of it has been a little bit of a drag, heritage, because the way that national heritage also works is like the grand narrative is about the trajectory of struggle and the grand heroes who saved us from apartheid. And so finding a way in, where does the story fit into? So there's going to have to be a lot of compromises, I do think, from both sides, but I do think it can be done.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I really learned a lot, really very impressive and, that really modeling in the, for the country, like, that kind of situation. I'd like to question is that, in the beginning you said in 1988, foundation,
Yes.
started, I just wanted to know that practical challenge, of course the land is like provided by the university, right? So I mean, not owned yet, right? So I mean that how you have the infrastructure, you started that, our challenge for the, fundraising or how people supported that kind of idea, or, and the same, who will be behind you or maybe someone like, very modern leadership, like just want to do the other support or something like that. What kind of support or how challenge you have to overcome for to establish on this important project?
So, the 66 Museum is actually a landowner, I should declare. It owns a building that was purchased for it by a, I don't know if you know, it's an American foundation, Atlantic Philanthropies, many years ago. And we raised money through the national lotteries to renovate the building. But that's not the building that I showed you. So that is a building that is part of its income generation that does very higher performances and also a lot of programming happens. The space that I showed you where the museum is in belongs to the Methodist Church. It became vacant at that time. So that is a rental lease agreement for that. The land that we do not own is the land that we walk on. And we do the memorial practices. And I think that's also part of the reason why everything was ephemeral, because it was also not to kind of interfere with that. But it's been a good exercise, I think, to discover what you can do, what people remember. And in some ways, it mirrors the loss that people had. And so things disappeared, their homes disappeared. And how do people find a place to settle? And in a sense, people from a heritage point of view, they find the museum as a place of settlement, and they hope that the return will happen in their lifetime so that they can live on the land from which they were displaced.
Yeah, please.
I know you said that District 6 Museum does a lot of remembrance work, but are there any initiatives, I guess, by the government or the country of South Africa that work to sponsor remembrance, kind of like how in the United States we have Juneteenth or Indigenous Peoples Day? Are there anything like that, or is it kind of not as open enough, if that makes sense?
Yeah, they are. I mean, I don't know if I've painted the government in an absolutely bad light. There is some bad light that they've kind of generated on their own. But yeah, there's a Heritage Day, which is now the 24th of September, and government will support certain projects, and also there will be government programs about it on that day. But there's a but. I want to say but. It's not very clear how you can actually access the fund for your own, those funds for your own projects. You hear sometimes arguments that, oh, government supported that for Heritage Day. And the government style of doing Heritage Day programs, I try my best, but it doesn't fit with the work that the museum does. So we could be part of it, but it's government driven and they do it. And government doesn't do it well because that's not their work. And they shouldn't be organising a Heritage Day Fest. Like, or they can fund it, but they shouldn't be organising. But it's got to fit in with the narrative of, you know, the country's journey of greatness. And we have had wonderful achievements, but all the government celebrations around, like this historical event has been around it. It layers over all four clans. And it's what I was talking about, like statues that are complete. There's no space for you to interact. And so those would be, and some of the government programs on Heritage Day feel to me like they actually contribute towards like a return to ethnic identities. And so in the attempt to accommodate everybody. So you'd have a Zulu dancer and an Afrikaans poem, but it remains Afrikaans, and that remains Zulu, and that remains Xhosa. So it's all of the different, it's sometimes also like the interfaith activities that we have. And sorry, you're going to see a little bit of a cynical side over here. But, and I believe in interfaith, but you have an event, and then there's prayers in Arabic, there's Hindu prayers, and then there's prayers in the Christian prayers, and my joke is always like, does God not understand English? One language, because I mean, it feels like a repetition. So what I'm saying, it's happening because we don't have a different model of doing it differently, but I think we're being a bit lazy and we need to think about different ways. Because if the government, for example, at the Heritage Day event don't accommodate all the 11 language groups and subgroups, then those people will say, we were excluded, but they were privileged. You know, if you go into that different people. So we haven't quite found the formula. But I think there is an idea that government support that, but many of the ideas don't align with what communities really want to do.
Oh, wow.
Thank you so much. I really appreciated this interesting talk and the tension that you highlighted between like the ephemeral performative piece and then the space, land, sort of more static, tangible aspect of memorialization. And I was curious if it connects to community in any way, like trying to articulate my question in that way, but if District 6 comes up both as the land itself, the institution, the museum, and then the community who was displaced. Like if there are any controversies or tensions around how people want to memorialize their experiences versus what an institution can do. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I couldn't articulate.
I think I got it. So I don't know if I mentioned it, but the people that are involved in the preparation for the walks, the people who are walking along, those who are doing those workshops for December 1st, those are all members of the District 6 community and broader. But you're asking about the expectations of people that the museum possibly can't meet and the conflicts, is that what you mean?
Yeah, or any controversies around the ways to memorialize.
Okay. Oh no, there definitely are. Because I mean, you can imagine there's something about the whole narrative around heritage that is evolved and make everybody want a plaque on the institution, they want a plaque on the church or on the school or something that signifies significance. And so I hope I don't sound like we brainwashing people into thinking differently, but it's about engaging with people about what does it mean, because the plaque is also, it's got a heavy burden in terms of maintenance and requirements, and thinking about different ways of how you can use art to memorialize also stands outside of the national narrative. So instead of, and I'm just using a mural as an example, people have done wonderful things on their own as well, decorative trees, and other things in their homes, on their grounds as well. So helping people to think about what are the alternatives. When the University of Technology wanted to build, they weren't actually going to build on top of the care of service, they were going to build all around it, so you actually couldn't access it. And the point was that we're not destroying it, and then cut off corners of it. And then they came up with a solution to the community to say, we'll put a glass case over it with a gold plant. And so many people were so excited about it. And then our discussion was, remember what is the point of this? Remember, you come here and you touch the stone. Remember the stone, this kind of stone has been exposed to the elements for how many years? And it survives because that's the point. It's about the environment, it's part of the environment and building into that. So we have those discussions. Some are lost because it's part of also finding that balance between leading and being led by people what people want, and giving leadership to that, but we also have to listen in a particular way. So it's that, they're not easy conversations because sometimes when people have very strong views and they're very vocal and articulate and loud, it can be really difficult to do that, but that is part of it demonstrates some of what District 6 Museum does in terms of other issues around identity and ethnicity as well. It's looking at those different ways and providing people in a gentle way. Don't you want to look at another alternative and what do you think about that? And sometimes we leave people to have the conversations without the museum's intervention and come up with some solutions.
Yeah, please.
I'd like to, is the moment, is there a time issue? So you're talking about memorialization through these kinds of memory activities, but generations are passing, and so the remembrance of what the loss of that empty space means, does that become more difficult to conceptualize these kinds of events?
I think not so much, it is a difficulty. It's also about, for me it's more about the desire of people to see this in their lifetime. And they're so aware of their own mortality, and many people have also died, both waiting for restitution of land and also kind of the cultural restitution in terms of memorialization. And in the early days of South Africa, soon after 1994, which is the year that we think of as the birth of the new South Africa, there was so much synergy between and energy and appetite for these two things happening together, and they've gone completely out of sync. In fact, the Land Affairs Department, the Land Commission, and the Heritage Department they kind of refused to work together. And I couldn't understand how you can memorialize the same land that you're developing on if you don't have the conversation about that. So yeah, it is a challenge because it is a lot of people. It feels like dreams are dashed in some way. It seems like a little thing, but I'm only telling about the museum, about the memorialization and the housing. But where people are, there's no service delivery. There are issues of transport. There are a lot of unresolved other issues that exacerbate the problem, which makes it really a difficult time. And I think also your question about the living memory, I think the District 6 Museum, it feels like it really started at the right time. There was still so much living memory to engage with. And a few years ago, people, it's very difficult to speak to people about their own death. You're not part of a family. I don't like that view when people say, you must record all these stories before they die. It just feels like some extractionist, because there's something different. It's not about feeding the archive, the monster that needs to be filled with oral history. It's also about the experience of restitution for people who want to tell these stories as well. So, yeah, the benefit of living memory is dwindling a bit. We have started doing recordings and more conversations between people, which are a young person interviewing an older person about their life and creating. We're not quite sure where it fits in, but there is that is available as well. So it's potentially available, but it is there. Yeah.
Joanna?
So, speaking to us, what do you hope that an international audience takes away, and how can we get involved?
That's a big question, I think. It's all for me, it's about also building knowledge and spreading the gospel of inclusive memorialization. Because it is about, also what happens when a movement becomes big and people start paying attention in a different way. And so I really would love that if people could explore, share other models that you might have. There are lots of projects and lots of activities and things that communities do across the world, I think, that we don't know about, and that are quite coherent and make sense for them. And my desire is always about finding ways to, what's the word? These are micro projects, and how do we expand or elevate and make these bigger, because they do make a difference. And I've been lamenting the past few days for various reasons, not entirely related to your council, but lamenting about a sudden acknowledgement that change is feeling harder at the moment than it did to me before. And it's feeling the world is feeling very heavy. And so I think, finding community projects and things that work for people and sharing that information. Do a PhD on some of the projects or some of the work. And supporting different ways, building knowledge and spreading the word.
Samira.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bonita. I just wondered if you could elaborate a bit more on the methodology to create a community-based, inclusive memorization project.
You mean as the museum does, or to create a museum in the first place?
As the museum does, yeah.
So I think, again, the 66 Museum has been very fortunate in that there is a living community, in that that living community who still remember what life was like in the 66, and they lived there and they've had that experience. So if I can take a little bit of a long way, in a short way, I'll try to be short, to answer that, just because the museum was started by a range of people, including former residents of District 6, artists, educators, activists, and so coming together. And so they create this museum, there's the map, people are interacting, and the momentum is maintained for a few years, roughly 3 years. And then because of where the museum is located, it is really in the city, and there are lots of tourist activities around it. And it's kind of become like a museum now, where the traditional museums are also located nearby. And so tour guides start bringing people into the museum. And busloads start coming in, which on the one hand is a good thing, but on the other hand, it displaces the community from the museum, who suddenly feel that, is this our museum or is it for the tourists? Because they become so comfortable with just sticking things on the wall, taking it down, and suddenly saying, no, we are a community museum and we're quite organic, but you actually can't just move things around. You know, that time at the beginning it was fine, because people were making sense of it and we learned a lot. And so kind of trying to, some people started staying away because they felt they were edged out of the museum. It is now a tourist space, it wasn't their space. There was someone who would bring a guitar and sit in the coffee shop and play, and people would sing along the music that they remember, and then the tour guide wants to tell a story and ask them to be quiet, and then there's this tension of, it's my story in my space, and you know, that would happen. There was coffee being drunk in the coffee shop. No one knew how to ask people how to pay for it. Because it was so lovely. And it was broke. But anyway, this lovely space, it was like a substitute for a lost home. And that's what it was. And as people started to recede, we had this idea, that is how the 7 Steps Club idea came. What do we do to really allow other people who are not part of the District 6 story, not been part of South Africa, how do we enable that conversation to happen without displacing people? And so we created an honorary club for former residents. And we scheduled it, they would come at certain times, we had reunions. It started off as coffee mornings with storytelling. And that's the group of people who, we call them our community researchers, who impact on the research, who are engaged in these workshops, who populate the archive with stuff that they've also kept. One person said, I just kept to observe you. I observed you for 10 years to see if I can trust you. And then they bring their items and their photographs to the archive. So it's been lots of conversations. It's going out to communities, drinking many cups of tea in people's homes as well, because it's about kind of developing that relationship. And we use a lot of methods also that communities use, of home-based meetings, going and getting a group together from District 6. If they're not mobile, someone gathers them together and we do an oral history or folk story in their homes. We've also done most of the exhibitions we've done since 2008 when we started the 7 Steps Club has been always in draft and engaging people, and they always have come and they have an opportunity to comment. They're not allowed to just change things because they don't like it, but they have to explain why this doesn't work or why things don't work if they don't feel that it should be part of it. So there's a lot of conversations that happen, and they are also, there are fewer and fewer people because of age, but they are also the first person testimony storytellers on the museum floor every day, and particularly with school groups as well. So those are just some of the ways. I wanted to say we used also some of the methods of the mass democratic movement of the 1980s, where there were a lot of you see from below workshops, how do you work with people's stories, and how do you grow an idea, grow a project from an idea and take it through the different stages. And so that's pretty much the way it's done. Every project is slightly different, but there's always a kind of mantra of community voice that we try to retain, sometimes better than other times, but for the most part that's always the intention.
So,
Yeah, I'm just curious to find out how the District 6 Museum has, if in any way, has shaped or influenced national level processes, whether social or political, despite it being like at community level and also just being based in Cape Town.
So yeah, mostly more in the Western Cape, I think, but the District 6 Museum, despite our arm's length distance from government, have been approached by the National Department of Arts and Culture to give input around policy, regional policy, national policy in terms of working with intangible heritage. A lot of them are still in drafts, they're white papers and they become something else, and blue papers and all kinds of things. But yes, in that sense, we've given input on that. And also because the expertise that was developed around collecting oral histories and archiving oral histories, and also something that we emphasize is about the training. Not everybody is an oral historian, despite what people say. Everyone says everyone can do an interview, which is correct, but not everyone can do an oral history interview. And so we have given some guidelines in terms of what makes an oral history interview different from a newspaper interview, for example. And so those are the things that we have input in there.
Bryce?
So you talked about like when District 6 was created, it faced like many critiques from more traditional museums.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if those traditional museums have kind of come around, seen District 6's success, like have they come around to see your way, maybe like change some of their ways, or are they still kind of very traditional?
No, I think they definitely have come around, because I think museums in Cape Town and the whole museum sector was very white and traditional before 1994. And so it was also a place where black people wouldn't go, and it was very conservative and very isolated, and very happy with being isolated and insulated. And so in 1994, with the new heritage policy, it does require, and Nelson Mandela was very firm about transformation in the heritage sector, and museums got directives to come up with transformation plans. But that was at the same time when the District 6 Museum started, and I don't think, plans in our national context take a long time for the penny to drop for people what it actually means. And a few years later they realize, oh, that's what you do. And so we've done workshops with the National Museum, and also in Cape Town as well, about this very thing about how do you build community, and how do you they call it outreach programs. We don't, because it always feels outreach always just implies something about us, that we are here and the community's there, and we reach out to them, and we try and always have a process of just collaboration, solidarity, working together. But we have helped government museums with their outreach programs.
Bonita, I have a question related to the Declaration of National Heritage Site Monument status, but also basically relation with government. That comes up rather often in the story of the museum. I've had the luck, as you know, to be at District 6 and to experience how the space is very different from traditional museum. It never about individual stories always feed into community. It's not monumental. It's about the presence of absence, things that you've mentioned. Do you think the difficulty for the Heritage Commission has to do with the difference from all of the models that have been inbuilt into a static understanding of how this sector functions, and the inability to conceive of how the future would look with a site that doesn't fit at all into those molds that they are used to? And then my question is, how do you change that with an institution that is about control? And really what you're proposing is, as an end-time monument, democratization of memory to the extent where retaining control goes against the purpose of the project.
That's part of what I should about feeling heavy, because I don't really know. We've had conversations, we've set up engagements with the community and the Heritage Agency to come and listen, but there's something about, and we've been told the regulation says we only need to consult with 3 people and it doesn't have to be face to face. It's like, this is not about consultation in that way, this is about how do we learn, how do we try to do things differently. So there's a reticence about doing that. And I do think we can. I have some ideas, but we don't actually know completely. It's difficult to change something that doesn't want to be changed. And that's difficult at the moment. There's a lot of scholarly work around inclusive memorialization, like working with memorial sites, around monumentalism, and looking at the Rose Must Fall campaign and the implications of that, and even before that time as well. But government officials, I don't think they read this, so the regulation is slightly fresher than it was, but it can be interpreted in the old way that they're familiar with, and so they stick with the safe space because it helps them to fulfill the KPIs quicker. But I don't think it's a lost cause, it's just really hard at the moment, because it's been a long time. And I joked with people and I said, maybe District 6 Museum, maybe we've engaged in what I call polite politics for a long time. And because we wanted to separate this, everyone having a protest about everything. And so like, how do you deal with conflict? So just to look at a different way of how you can deal with conflict that is not a march. So we call it a procession that is engaging, that invites conversation. It feels like it's a bit too soft at the moment for what we need to get. I think they are like a certain amount of time.
All right, please join me in thanking Bonita.